tutoring for our students who are reading below grade level in grades K to 3. The remaining 3 amendments were for free in-person summer school, grant funding for nonprofits to support at-risk students, and the final one was the option to start the school year 2 weeks early. So all of those have been posted on board docs for the board's review, and the budget committee would appreciate an upvote on those amendments.
Thank you, Board Member Murray. It has been moved on behalf of the committee that the CEO's budget is approved as amended. No second is required because it was moved on behalf of the committee. Are there any discussions on the amendments?
I have a.
Board Member Burrows?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Williams and Chairman Murray. Could you just update your document, Mr. Murray? My item is shouldn't read grant fund for nonprofits to support at-risk students. It should just be fund to support at-risk students because we're still working out the details. So it doesn't have to say grant fund. It should say, and it's not just exclusive to nonprofits, it's schools, the whole nine. So it should just say fund to support at-risk students.
Thank you,
Understood.
Mr. Burrows.
We can get that change incorporated. Thank you, Board Member Burrows.
Board Member Williams, I'm sorry.
Mr. Curtis Valentine?
I was trying to raise my hand. I don't see it, the icon on there. I would just say, I was able to listen in on the budget committee meeting on Friday. I was unable to join up, obviously, because there are issues around quorum of members. But a number of these items I oppose for a number of reasons. One of which we are in a budget crisis, and I expect us to be one for the short future based on where we are economically. And these recommendations are done so without that in mind. There are other recommendations that have been put forth that to me are not founded on research or collaboration. And so for the first time in 8 years of me being on the school board, I will have to oppose this budget recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Valentine. Board Member Boozer Struthers.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to also note the budget deficit and what I had noted last Thursday, that I definitely was interested in seeing amendments from this committee, even though there is a budget deficit, in case there are options for Dr. Goldson around the existing budget, just to understand some of the priorities. So I just wanted to also note that I cannot fully support this due to that. And additionally, some of these ideas that are so new, I don't fully understand how they'll be implemented. So I just wanted to make that note as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boozer Struthers. Are there any other comments? Well, I will take the floor for a moment and echo the sentiment of the timing in which these amendments were presented to the board. We have been discussing budgets since December of last year and have had 2 opportunities to discuss thoughts, ideas, concerns around the budget. For us to have only Friday to have gotten information on millions of dollars to be added to the budget, I think it would do us a disservice for us to take an action on information that is very new and unfamiliar. So I too cannot support these amendments. So Board Member Mr. Burrows.
Yes, I'd like to speak just for a matter of the record. I submitted my amendments to your committee back in January, and here we are in March. I believe if the board was not shut down, it wouldn't have been a rushed process to have us vote on those amendments on Friday. I do want to explain my amendment just for the public. essentially is to take $3 million to work with students who are considered at risk. Frederick Douglass has a quote, "It's easier to build strong children than repair broken men." And so often there are a host of resources for students once they're arrested. The Department of Juvenile Services works with nonprofits and provide a lot of support for students once they're arrested. As someone who has sat in juvenile court so many times, it is primarily a sea of Black and brown youth from our school system and from our county. And when I look at their records and when I look at our expulsions, when I used to sit on our expulsions committee, it was very clear that these young people were in trouble early on. So in elementary school, they had suspensions and poor attendance. And in middle school, that behavior elevated. And then in high school, they commit a misdemeanor or an armed robbery, and now they're sitting in jail. And so the goal of this fund is essentially to say, we're going to work with students on the front end. And I'll read it specifically what the thought is, where nonprofits, churches, businesses, and schools can apply directly to this fund to work with students with mentoring, mental health services, workforce development, social work, family support, athletic programs, extracurricular activities, academic enrichment, exposure activities, restorative justice practices, and alternatives to suspension. I think it's so important that, the reality is, and this is actually something that a lot of us agree on this board, that the school to prison pipeline doesn't begin and end with 30 SROs. It begins way before that. And if we know that if we don't invest in students on the front end at the first sight of crisis when they're exhibiting cries for help, then they will eventually end up in the criminal justice system. And so that's the goal of this amendment, to provide those additional mentoring, workforce development, social work, family support, athletic programs. Our students need more support proactively. And so that's what the goal of my amendment is. And so I just wanted to raise that for the record so that the public doesn't believe that, we're doing these crazy things that are not founded in research like was stated earlier. There's a lot of research about providing mentoring support and workforce development and mental health and social work and family support for at-risk students. There's a lot of research on this topic. And I think this is an area of growth that is needed for the school system. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Board Member Burrows. Next up is Miss Belinda Queen. Board Member Queen.
Board Member Queen, thank you. Thank you so very much, Madam Vice Chair. I just want to say, and actually, I want to actually say that as when I was sat in the committee, and I'm the vice chair of the budget committee, everything that was brought up, and I just say this to you guys, has something to do with academics. You guys know our kids have been through a whole year through this pandemic. There's a lot going on, and some kids need help. It was not like we're just suggesting money just be put out. This money is to help to make sure Prince George's County Public Schools achieve and get where they need to get in the 21st century. Every one of these items are so important, from the one Mr. Burrows brought up, from the community hubs, from the STEM program, for the ones to help the kids who are performing low. Each one is all about academic. When I sat in that budget committee, to be honest with you guys, I had some budget items requested. And instead of bringing them as a motion, I just talked about them. I wanted to put a fence around a tennis court at Lago High School. I wanted to make sure we had gates at all of our schools, especially starting with Ernest Just, because they complain about dumping. I wanted turf football fields at Lago High School. I want all the parking lots at our school paved. I want bathroom sinks and touchless dryers in every one of our schools, and I want our school security system to be updated, similar to the security system we have at home with our rings, but I just need to make sure the systems we have in our schools are updated. I asked for these things, but I didn't ask for a motion to be made on them because I realized that the academics of our students are so more far important. So I just want to address, I don't feel like these items that are put on are useless because they are for our kids to make sure that they have everything that they need to succeed. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Board Member Queen. Next up, we have Miss Board Member Shayla Adams Stafford. Ms. Stafford.
Thank you. I'd just like to provide some context for the board action summaries that I submitted. So as you know, right now, we are in a situation where many students, especially high school students, are actually leaving the school system in order to care for their families by entering the workforce. And as it stands, we've had up to 400 high school students that have not participated in virtual learning at all. We've had over 1,600 students that have not logged on at all. And of those students, 400 of them are high school students. Now, that actually costs the school district upwards of $6 million annually. And so what the program that I am recommending, this program is called the Trans-Ed Academy for Working Students. It actually would allow us to reclaim those students into our school system and educate them at a lower cost. And ultimately, an investment in this program would allow us to actually bring revenue into the school system, upwards of $1.2 million. So in this program has many clear impacts for students. It increases their engagement with PGCPS. It improves their achievement. It provides them with a personal virtual coach. And again, it keeps us from losing that per pupil dollar when they disengage. And so this program would enable us to not only bring those students back into the fold, but bring them back in at a lower cost. And thus we would not lose that money and we'd have a net gain of 1.2 million. Additionally, I wanted to just provide some context for the special education audit that I posted. So, as we know, special education programs are an essential component of our school system, and we have upwards of 10% of our students that are in special education programs. And so it's really important to note that, having a special education program, there are certain state and federal requirements that we have to meet. And so one thing that I hear from community members all the time, all throughout my district, are sort of their frustrations with some parts of the special education program, and then there are parts of the program that are working really well. And so what would happen would be an external audit would come and work with our internal audit in order to conduct a comprehensive, sort of assessment of our special education program to determine where are bright areas, where are our systems working really well, and where are there some areas of improvement, thinking about IEP timeliness, overrepresentation of certain groups within the special education program. How are we responding to intervention prior to students being referred to the special education program? And ultimately an investment on the front end of our special education programs and thinking about how can we make this program work even more efficiently will save us money in the long run by having us to make that strong investment. And then lastly, in thinking about our Bridge to Excellence schools, which many of you may or may not know, these are our schools that are the most consistently are low performing schools, and many of these students require special education services or have limited English proficiency. These schools need more support. That's what equity is, to ensure equity across the system is actually giving more to the students that may need that extra support. And so some of the problems that these schools have faced have been a lack of opportunities for collaboration between educators, inconsistent curriculum implementation, gaps in student learning, rotating doors of teachers, not having a consistent educator, and just not monitoring of the curriculum. And so creating a fund that would allow these schools the opportunity to innovate and to rethink about what is their instructional program. I believe that we'll find that most innovation and most change really truly happens at the school level. That is the greatest lever for change. And in my work and as an educator and working with districts across the country, I've found this to be true. And so giving these schools the opportunities for mastery-based learning, competency-based learning, place-based learning, giving school administrators the opportunity to decide how they structure the day in order to provide for more opportunities for collaboration. We believe that this will lead to increased achievement for students. And there's a lot of research to support that as well. And so these are the amendments that I have put forward, and I just wanted to provide some context for those as well.
Thank you, Board Member Stafford. Next up is Board Member Queen for round two. But before I go to Board Member Queen, I would like to ask if there are any other members who would like to speak in the first round before moving on. If not, we're starting round two. Board Member Queen.
Hi, yes, and thank you so very much again, Madam Vice Chair. I just want to, you guys, say to each and every one of us, so many of our elected officials and so many people who are well off in our county have the means to put their students in private schools. And it's, to me, sometimes it's sad that even some of our elected leaders who make decisions for our school system when it comes to financial need do the same. We need to make sure, as we are making decisions and we are elected and appointed to make the decisions, that we are putting the kids first, and we're making sure that we can do everything within our power for the kids who are low income, the kids who are not achieving, to make sure that they have everything so they can achieve, and so they can then come back and invest also in our school system. And it is up to us to make sure that they have that. So I will definitely be voting for this. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Board Member Queen. If there are no other comments, I think we're ready to take the vote on the committee's recommendation. Ms. Berkeley, would you please call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Adams Stafford,
Yes.
Mrs. Ahmed,
Yes.
Miss Boozer Strother,
Abstain.
Mr. Burrows,
Yes.
Mr. Harris, I'll return. Mr. Montero,
Yes.
Mr. Murray,
Aye.
Mrs. Queen,
Yes.
Mrs. Shepherd,
Abstain.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
No.
Mrs. Williams,
No.
Mr. Harris, okay, I have 7 ayes, 2 nays, 2 abstentions, and 2 absent.
Thank you, Ms. Berkeley.
A point of order. Because this is a recommendation from the CEO, does that require 9 votes? I'm just curious. Is there board counsel can explain that to me? I mean the
You're
amendments.
muted, Mr. Thomas.
I'm referring to the amendments, not the budget itself.
So with respect to the budgeting approval process, that authority rests with the board, so it's not within the day-to-day authority of the CEO.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that,
Hey, sorry, I had to leave and rejoin the meeting. Can I cast my vote? Sorry.
sure.
Just aye.
Thank you. We have to deal with these technology issues. So with that, the amendment has passed and the budget will be transmitted to the county executive as amended. Next up is item 4.2, budget consent agenda on the resolution for expanding community workforce agreement for capital improvement projects. We have 2 committee recommendations on this item. Mr. Board Member Murray, would you please present the recommendation from the Operating Budget and Fiscal Affairs Committee? Board Member Murray.
Can I yield to Mr. Burrows on this?
Sure.
I'm sorry. Can you present it and then you could transfer it over? Is he going to be talking about a part of the presentation, a part of the recommendation, or is he making the recommendation? And I don't believe he's a member of the OBAFA committee.
Yeah, I will move to accept the recommendation and just wanted to yield to him to kind of explain it.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Burrows.
Yes, colleagues, and thank you, Chairman Murray. Thank you, Chairwoman Ahmed. And thank you to the members of the board. Last year, the board voted to do a community workforce agreement. On the floor of that meeting, Ms. Williams asked for an evaluation to be done. And that was seconded by Board Member Valentine. That evaluation was done, and the community workforce agreement pilot was deemed a success. With the administration to expand that success. I think it's so important that every opportunity possible that we hire individuals who live in Prince George's County. We ensure that they are provided health care and protected against wage theft, and that companies pay into their retirement. This is a proposal that is particularly important during this time of this pandemic, because as so many people were out of work this summer because of the pandemic, Prince George's County Public Schools went out of our way to hire our citizens and to pay them strong wages. And so I'd like to thank the board for passing this, I believe unanimously last year, and I hope we can do that again today.
Thank you, Board Member Burrows. Board Member Ahmed, would you please present the recommendation from the Policy and Governance Committee?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I do think that we need to vote on Mr. Burrows first.
So I'm just wondering if these notes are, please confirm if you have an action item that is under this expanding of the community workforce agreement. Do you have an action item that's related to that?
No, ma'am. My action item is under the legislative update portion.
Oh,
Okay, thank
no,
you. This must be just an error.
No, it's not. I can explain.
Oh, I'm sorry. The Policy and Governance Committee recommendation. Yes, I can read and alert the members of the board to this recommendation. So the Policy and Governance Committee met virtually on February 1st, 2021, with the following members in attendance. Myself as committee chair, Joshua Thomas as committee vice chair, Mr. Burrows, Ms. Boozer-Strother, and student board member Nina Jackson. Ms. Queen also attended the meeting as a guest. And amongst other items on the agenda, the committee discussed the board action summary proposal from Mr. Burrows. And after discussing the proposal, the committee voted unanimously to recommend that the board approve the proposal. And so that is the recommendation that is on board docs, and I would like to share with you all today. Thank you, Mr. Burrows, for keeping me aligned, and Ms. Williams as well for that reason as well.
Thank you so much, Board Member Ahmed. Thank you very much, Mr. Burrows, for moving this forward and spearheading all of this. I appreciate your work. It has been moved on behalf of the committees to approve the workforce agreement. There is no second required because it was moved on behalf of the committee. Is there any discussion on this topic? Hearing and seeing no hands raised, I think we're ready to take a vote. Ms. Berkeley, would you please call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Adams Stafford,
Yes.
Mrs. Ahmed,
Yes.
Ms. Boozer-Strother,
Yes.
Mr. Burrows,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Montero,
Yes.
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
Mrs. Queen,
Yes.
Mrs. Shepherd,
Yes.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Yes,
13 ayes.
thank you, Ms. Berkeley. That has passed unanimously. Next up is item 5.0, up for discussion, the legislative update. Next, that is what we will discuss. Board Member Ahmed, would you please present the recommendation from the Policy and Governance Committee?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, I may do that. colleagues and members of the public, the Policy and Governance Committee consists of 5 members, as I have mentioned before, myself as committee chair, Mr. Thomas as committee vice chair, Mr. Burrows, Ms. Boozer-Struther, and Ms. Jackson. The committee, we've been doing a lot of work, let me tell y'all. We've been doing a lot of work, and the majority of the committee voted to recommend that the Board of Education support several bills, and I want to list them out for you. We also voted to oppose a bill as well. So the bills that we voted to recommend that the full board support include Prince George's County Board of Education student member voting and member candidacy, which is PG 506-2-21. State Department of Education Early Literacy and Dyslexia Practices, Guidance and Assistance, that's SB 126. The Commission on History, Culture, and Civics and Education, which is HB 140. Primary and Secondary Education Mental Health Services, the Counselors Not Cops Act, that's HB 496. Correctional Services, Immigration, Detention, Prohibition, that's the Dignity Not Detention Act, that's SB 478 or HB 16. The Primary and Secondary Education, Expansion of Mental Health Services and Prohibition of School Resource Officers, Police Free Schools Act, which is HB 1089. Public Schools Student Attendance Excused Absences for Mental Health Needs, that's HB 461. Early Childhood Education Child Care Provider Support Grant Program, the Child Care Provider Support Act, which is SB 890/HB 608. And the bill that the committee recommended the Board of Education oppose is Public School Self-Contained Special Education Classrooms, Use of Video Recording Devices, which is SB 665, HB, or otherwise known as HB 715. In addition to that, the committee also reviewed the impacts of the Baltimore, Washington Superconducting Maglev project. Basically, the synopsis on this is the Federal Railroad Administration and the Maryland Department of Transportation are preparing a draft environmental impact statement. And draft section 4F, evaluation to evaluate the potential impacts of construction and operating a high maintenance superconductive magnetic levitation or SC maglev system between DC and Baltimore with an intermediate stop at BW Marshall Airport. So that's a little bit about the project. Although staff did inform the committee that there's no final route for construction on the projects, it was noted that the project might cause construction under school buildings, specifically Bladensburg and Eleanor Roosevelt High School, Beacon Heights, Lamont, Montpelier, Portstown, and Roger Heights Elementary Schools. So after discussion, the committee voted to recommend that the full board write a letter outlining its opposition to maglev. And so that was a lot of information for y'all. I move on behalf of the committee to approve.
Ms. Ahmed, before you move on that, I'm sorry, Ms. Ahmed, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Mm-hmm.
There are only 4 items that are presented on board docs, and I think we had a number of items that you read. The action that we're taking today, colleagues, are on the 4 items that are presented and posted on board docs. The other items will be presented at the board meeting on March 11th.
Madam Vice Chair, my motion is on behalf of the committee to approve the committee's recommendations on the legislative matters presented and discussed and voted upon on the committee on February 1st and February 17th of the committee.
Correct. I understand that, yes, you are presenting several items over several meetings, but as we communicated earlier today, those items were just presented to the board today, and the board members have not had the opportunity to review all of those items. And so we will come back to those other items on March 11th.
Madam Chair, with all due respect, I am moving on behalf of the committee. I would like to vote on the motion for all of these items, and I'll explain why. Is one of the reasons is if we wait further time to the next board meeting, there are Annapolis, there are several bills and hearings happening, and our committee voted to take positions on several items, as you heard.
Correct.
It's very important that
Correct.
board's recommendations be voted upon and move forward so that positions can be taken on those items.
I
And if it's not the will
completely,
of the board to move forward with those items, then that's the will of the board. But
I
still move
completely
on.
understand your concern with the timing that's happening in Annapolis. I completely understand that, and I share your concern. However, if the committee is a subset of the board, and it is the responsibility of the board to pass this forward. And in order for the board members to make a thoughtful decision, they needed this in time in order to review. This was not posted on board docs, so we cannot vote on it if the board members were not aware of those other topics.
Yes.
So I really appreciate your enthusiasm about making sure we get ahead of this, but unfortunately, this is a new item and the board members have not seen it, only those that were on the committee. And that's a committee of 5. And now we're asking the board members of 14 to vote on something that they're not aware of. And so I'm sorry if we cannot vote
Yeah.
on it today.
Point of order. Point of order. Madam Vice Chair, Chairwoman Ahmed has the right to make whatever motion she wants to make. Now, you can vote your content on that motion, but there's nothing that precludes Ms. Ahmed from making any motion on adding any bills. In this moment, if you feel like you don't have enough information to make an informed decision, you can abstain or vote no, but she has every right as a member of the board to make a motion. That motion has been seconded. She's doing it on behalf of her committee. And so I think we need to follow our policies and our Robert's rules. And she has every right to make the motion that she just made. And if you feel like you're ill prepared, then you may abstain or vote no.
Thank you, Mr. Burrows, for the comment. The preparedness is only because we did not receive it. And because this is a special meeting and this item was posted on the public side of the board, the public is not aware that we're even discussing this. And because this is a special meeting, not a normal meeting, we cannot do that because the public was not notified.
Madam Vice Chair, I made the motion for the special meeting and I listed legislative update. I didn't say what the legislative update was going to be. I didn't list every element of any proposal. So I made the motion, legislative update was approved by the board. And so her motion is in order.
So I understand what you made the motion back on Thursday. However, when we notified the public, we listed the actual items for the special meeting that we will be discussing. And therefore, according to the Opens Meeting Act, we are not allowed to do that. So thank you very much.
Point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burrows, for your comments.
Point of order. I listed the agenda topic. I said legislative update. I didn't specify which items on the legislative update there were. And so the public received the information that there would be an agenda item to discuss a legislative update.
And I agree with you.
You can't control what Ms. Ahmed's motion. If her motion includes those other elements, then they include those other elements. But
right.
The motion that passed the board was legislative update, and that was posted.
So you're absolutely right. On Thursday, you made a motion to have a special meeting on Monday, 72 hours in advance, which was Friday. The specific items that we plan to discuss in this special meeting was posted. Therefore, because this is a special meeting, we cannot go outside of the lines. Thank you very much. Mr. Valentine, did you have a question?
No, I would just, I'm looking at board counsel, just for those who are watching, just to get clarification on this. And also one other point, Mr. Thomas, on board docs and the supporting documentation, I see DJ Williams and Associates LLC on the top of the page. Can you just clarify whether this person is representing the board in lieu of the contract being in question, sir?
So let me first comment on the procedural issue that the board is debating on. And based upon what was posted on board docs for this evening's meeting, it did include the February 4th, 2021 memorandum from Ms. Ahmed to Dr. Miller, the board chair. It only included the 4 items that you all have been discussing. So appropriate notification has not been given to the public of matters beyond that as part of this evening's legislative agenda. And of course, the board vice chair has presumably accurately stated that the board members have not received this information prior to today. So for that reason, I do concur that these that the items beyond the 4 should be brought back to the board at your meeting on March 11th. On the issue that you raised, Mr. Valentine, on the contract issue, I declined to comment on that because it is a matter that is in dispute, potentially in litigation, that may be subject to further review. So I would decline to publicly comment on that.
Madam Chair, a point of clarification. I do
Yes,
want
Ms. Ahmed.
to let board counsel and other members of the public know, because the members of this body already know, that I approved the memo to be posted yesterday, requested that it be put on online for the members of the public to see. That request was denied by board leadership, and so I sent a copy by myself to members, colleagues, via email so that you all could have it, albeit it was around, it was just about 6.5 hours ago. But I do want to have on record that I had approved the memo to be posted yesterday, and it was not posted, although it was requested.
Thank you, Ms. Ahmed. But for clarity, we have to inform everyone it was 10 p.m. last night. And so staff received it this morning. And so I will now ask Ms. Berkeley to call the vote for the 4 items that are posted on board docs. Ms. Berkeley, would you please call the roll?
Got a hand up, Madam Vice Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't see a hand up. I'm sorry.
Don't we typically go one by one on legislative items, or Ms. Ahmed, you're one to do this in whole?
Yes, Ms. Boozer-Strother, I'm just moving on. I'm moving all of the recommendations on behalf of the committee. If it's the, that is my motion on the floor. If a separation is required, then I don't know what would be appropriate to handle that situation, given that this was a full request of the committee.
Well, at this point, the appropriate procedure would be to move for the 4 items that were previously presented to the board and that were posted as part of the agenda on board docs for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Ms. Berkeley, would you please call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Adams Stafford,
Yes.
Mrs. Ahmed,
Yes.
Ms. Boozer-Strother,
Abstain.
Mr. Burrows,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Montero,
Abstain.
Mr. Murray,
Aye.
Mrs. Queen,
Yes.
Mrs. Shepherd,
Abstain.
Mr. Thomas,
Aye.
Mr. Valentine,
No.
Mrs. Williams,
No.
Eight ayes, 2 nays, 3 abstentions, 1 absent.
Thank you, Ms. Berkeley. Next up is the consent agenda. We have several items on the consent agenda. I will ask that items 6.8 and 6.9 be taken separately. Is there any other?
Madam Chair, a point of order. I would like to move to overrule your motion on the ability for us to vote on items from the policy committee from February 17th.
So noted. Mr. Thomas, how should we proceed? Council,
So do we need to second it or?
you're on mute.
Ms. Ahmed has made a motion to overrule, but I think what's more more appropriate is whether she wants to make a motion to the board to reconsider the vote that it just took. I've already given my legal opinion on the issue, on the process issue or the procedural issue regarding the items that are properly on the agenda before the board this evening. So you all took a vote based upon that. If Ms. Ahmed wants to now have the board reconsider that, she should make a motion for reconsideration.
Ms. Ahmed?
Thank you. Just to clarify, it would be a motion to reconsider the existing motion to include those items from the February 17th meeting as well. Is that correct, Mr. Thomas?
That is correct, Ms. Ahmed.
Okay, so I move to reconsider the motion to approve the recommendations of the committee and include those recommendations for approval from the February 17th meeting as well.
Second.
Thank you.
I just have a point of clarification for the record. Is that just to reconsider with a separate vote to then approve the legislative items?
Ms. Ahmed?
I believe that is a question, a parliamentary question for Mr. Thomas.
So the appropriate thing to do would be first to have the board vote on the motion to reconsider. If there's an affirmative majority vote on that, then you all would vote on the substantive issue, and that is whether or not you would approve all items presented by the Policy and Governance Committee this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Before we move into discussion on that, since she received a second, I would just like to just make sure everyone understands that as we move into this discussion, we're moving into an area that could be in violation of the Opens Meetings Act. Thank you. Any discussion? Ms. Boozer Struthers.
I have a question. Who was the second? I missed that.
Mr. Harris.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Boozer Struther.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. That was exactly my question is, are we in violation of the Open Meeting Act to do this? I'm less concerned about the moving forward those agenda items, but if we're in violation of the Open Meetings Act, then that could create issues down the road. So on anything tonight. So I just want clarity on that.
So on that issue, I'll clearly state for the record that due to the fact that these items were not part of the notice and public posting for this evening's meeting, the items beyond the four, that very well could result in a Open Meetings Act complaint as well as a violation finding. So I'll go on record as stating that.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Valentine?
Just for clarity, Mr. Thomas, what are the penalties for violations of Open Meeting Act, both monetarily and otherwise?
So I'm not aware of any monetary penalties associated with that, but obviously, if a complaint was filed before the Open Meetings Compliance Board, that would result in a public opinion issued by that entity, either finding that there was a violation or finding that there was not. Obviously, no governing agency wants to be the subject of violations of the Open Meetings Act. So I certainly encourage you all to act with caution around that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Ms. Adam Stafford, Board Member Adam Stafford. Board Member Adam Stafford, you're on mute.
Yes, I was wondering if Board Member Ahmed would consider rescinding this vote and us to bring up these items possibly in a special meeting, possibly this week.
Yes, I would be amenable to that, given the timeliness of the requirements of this passage. So yes, I
Thank
can.
you. Am I hearing a friendly amendment to Ms. Ahmed's motion?
Yes, that she would rescind this motion and consider having a special meeting to discuss these legislative issues this week, considering the timeliness of the motions.
So this is more than like a substitute motion on to her motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Burrows?
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Mr. Thomas, can you please outline, you expressed on the record that you believe that this could be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. I have the Open Meetings Act in front of me. Can you please cite where in the act that you're referencing? Because I'm reading something very different in the actual act. And so I just want you to cite for the record where in the act that you're referencing, if you can pull it up and read it, because I believe you're totally incorrect.
So, Mr. Burrows, I don't have the Open Meetings Act provisions in front of me right now, but what I'm referring to in that statement was the requirement for a public body to provide notice of items and information that will appear on its agenda. So here in this case, obviously, what was posted on board docs pertained to the 4 items that were discussed by the board, but did not include the additional 7 items. So that's what I'm referring to with respect to potential violations, and that is with respect to the notice to be provided of agenda items, and that's also consistent with your own board policy.
Okay, Madam Vice Chair, just as a matter of the record, the Maryland Open Meetings Act Manual 10th edition that was updated in January 2021, Chapter 2 is on notice and agenda. And if you go down to Section D of that, it says agenda requirement. And within that, let me just pull it up and quote it directly. It says, the act provides public bodies some leeway to add items to an agenda after the agenda has been made available to the public. See Section 3-302.1E. Nothing in this section may be construed to prevent a public body from altering the agenda of a meeting after the agenda has been made available to the public. I'm quoting directly from Chapter 2 of the Maryland Open Meetings Act. And so it was just said here that we would be in violation, but right on the website under agenda requirements, and it goes on to explain why this would be allowable and not a violation. And so I just felt the need to quote and read this verbatim. I know there's a compromise that Ms. Adams Stafford and Ms. Ahmed just did on the floor, but as a matter of record, I felt obligated to read this part of the Maryland Open Meetings Act manual.
All right, and thank you, Mr. Burrows, for that. I want to provide just one comment on that. When you're talking about adding items to the agenda, as you know, this board has already approved the agenda at the beginning of this meeting. So you all approved this agenda as it was posted on board docs. That agenda included the 4 legislative items and not 11 items that the board is now asking for a vote on. So I want to place that on the record because I think that does make a substantive difference as to the language that Mr. Burrows just read.
Well,
thank you.
I guess, but Madam Vice Chair, I just want to say for the record that the question that Mr. Valentine posed was about the Open Meetings Act. The response that Mr. Thomas just gave was about board policy. And so I just think it's important that if we're saying it's going to be a violation of the Open Meetings Act, that clearly it's not.
No, I don't want to get into a debate about this, Mr. Burrows, but my point was in the language of the Open Meetings Act, as you just read it, it did talk about agenda. However, in this instance, as I said, you all approved the agenda as posted on board docs. So with that occurring, I don't think you just get to, willy-nilly change the agenda at any time throughout the meeting to add additional items that were not posted and for which notice was not provided. So if you were going to amend the agenda, the appropriate time would have been prior to the board approving it.
Thank you. Ms. Ahmed?
Thank you, Vice Chair Williams. I just had a question for council. So this item is on the agenda as a discussion item. What does this mean, that we can't be making motions on items for discussion that are not explicitly written down and posted? I'm just trying to understand for the future as well. You're on mute.
You're on mute, Mr. Thomas.
The agenda item at issue is requesting this board to take a position, to take action on these different legislative initiatives. So, you all may be discussing it, but you're also taking action on the recommendations of the legislative committee. So, that's why I'm giving the opinion that I am with respect to the notice requirement.
Okay, so just to be clear, folks can make motions on discussion items in the future.
We have to be very clear what type of meeting we're in. If we're in a regular meeting, then what you're reading might apply. But because this is a special board meeting, there are different rules that apply in the Opens Meeting Act and notification of the public and so on. So we have to be very cautious of acting in this special meeting environment so that we're not in violation. And so that's what we're trying to make sure that we don't do. In a normal meeting, there's a little bit more flexibility. But in particular, in any sense, the moment to change the agenda is at the beginning before we approve the agenda. In a special meeting, we need to have notification to the public that we're going to be talking about these special items. And so that's where I think the clarification it needs to be made is that we are acting in a special meeting environment. And so different rules apply.
Okay, so what I'm taking from, I'm just expressing, this is what I'm taking from this is that in a special meeting, if there's a discussion item, then we can't vote. There cannot be motions made on discussion items that are not listed because it's a special meeting.
Additional items cannot be added to that meeting if they were not posted for the public to be aware that we would be talking about those items. If you want to make a motion on an item that was already posted, that is a different conversation. But if the item has never been posted for the public to be made aware, we cannot add it to the agenda.
Okay.
And so,
so that still leaves me a little bit confused. But I don't want to. I know we have very many other items on the agenda, but I do want to express that this logic is not making sense to me.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Berkeley, can you call the roll to, I guess, Ms. Adam Stafford's motion that's on the table? Would you read it and then call the roll? I'm sorry, 1 second.
No,
okay.
I just wanted her to read the motion, please.
Okay, thank you.
Motion to rescind the previous motion and call a special meeting of the board to take action on the Policy and Governance Committee's recommendations.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Adams Stafford.
Yes.
Mrs. Ahmed.
Yes.
Ms. Boozer Strother.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Ms. Jackson.
Yes.
Mr. Montero.
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Mrs. Queen.
Yes.
Mrs. Shepherd.
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Valentine.
Aye.
Mrs. Williams.
Yes.
13 ayes.
Thank you. next up is the consent agenda. We have several items that we want to discuss. I will ask that we address items 6.8 and 6.9 separately. Are there any other board members who wish to separately take on any items? Hearing none, Dr. Golson, will you please introduce items 6.1 to 6.7? The board action summary for the National World Language Week. 6.2, a proclamation for the observation of Read Across America. 6.3, the proclamation for Prince George's County History Day competition. The proclamation for Pi Day. Proclamation for observing the National Women's History Month. And a proclamation for the observation of Irish American Heritage Month. And the proclamation of the proclamation for observation of the arts in our schools month.
Yes, you've just read all 6. So item 6.1 to 6.7 requires board approval of proclamation.
Thank you so much. May I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any
Aye.
nays? Hearing none, that motion has passed. Item 6.8, the CEO's recommendation for school safety and security. The board discussed this item at a previous board member. Dr. Golson, do you have any comments?
Now, this presentation was presented, we began this conversation in June around school resource officers. I did a presentation for the Board of Education in the first part of January. And now I'm bringing it back to the board for approval of the CEO's recommendation. Item 6.8, CEO's recommendation of school safety and security requires board approval.
Thank you, Dr. Golson. Board Member Ahmed, would you please present the recommendation for the Policy and Governance Committee, from the Policy and Governance Committee?
Thank you, Vice Chair Williams. Colleagues, I'm really excited to be presenting this proposal to you on behalf of the Policy and Governance Committee. The proposal contains several actions to help dismantle the school to prison pipeline, including increasing mental health supports, establishing an oversight committee for school discipline, discontinuing agreements with law enforcement agencies for armed officers starting next school year, and prohibiting the arrests of students, amongst some other items. You've heard from very many members of the community at this board meeting and at other board meetings for the need for these kinds of changes, and citing specific data as well. The detailed proposal is available for viewing on board docs, and I wanted to thank every colleague that agreed to speak to me about this proposal, and I do ask for each person's support on it. With that, I move to approve the Protect Our Students proposal on behalf of the Policy and Governance Committee.
Thank you, Board Member Ahmed. It has been moved on behalf of the committee to alter some of the CEO's recommendation. No second is required here because it was moved on behalf of the committee. Given the committee's report is seeking to change some and reject some of the CEO's recommendations, there will need to be a 2/3 vote to do so. For that, that is a total of 9 votes. Before I open the discussion, I want to remind the board that we will adhere to the 5 and 3 minute rule, 5 minutes in the first round and 3 minutes in the second round. Are there any comments, questions, or discussions on this item? Seeing none, I think we're ready to take the vote on the committee's recommendation. Ms. Berkeley.
There are some folks that have.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Board Member Stafford, Adam Stafford.
I believe Ms. Queen and Ms. Bouger Struthers were before me.
Okay, Ms. Queen?
Yeah, I just want you. So you said it will take 9 votes for everyone who's on. For 2/3 would be 9 of who's on.
2/3 would be 9 votes, correct?
None of the members that are on here. That's what I'm going to just want a little clarification up. That was my first question. And then my second one, I just wanted to comment on the policy committee adjustment. I just want to thank you guys. I think it was a great adjustment. We've had many of our constituents, many staff members, many students speak out on this. As we first started talking about getting rid of SROs, and you guys know I'm really involved with the community police, and I really felt like they need to be out in the community, community out polices. So I had no problem with the SROs, but when I saw for some reason a recommendation came from the county executive's office to the CEO to remove school security, it's a little different. You know, at one time our principals were concerned about the SROs, and then for us to say, let's move school security, I think that was a little harsh for us to come back with something like that after we were really getting people used to saying, hey, you know, we're maybe just moving SROs, we're gonna have, well, you know, we'll have school security. I look at it a little different. SROs, the county pays for it, and there'll still be police officers on the street. I don't believe in anybody losing a job. They're union workers, but they will still have a job. But if we get rid of some of our school security, we're talking about getting rid of union jobs. Nowadays, with the pandemic and so much going on, it's not the fact even about the money, but in the jobs, but I've heard so many great things, how the school security do work with the police. I heard so many great things about the difference of the school security and of the police officers. And we heard so many great reports about how it could have been a whole lot more rest, but it wasn't. So I asked us to really think about that. So I really hope we all just vote on this recommendation, because I feel it's a great recommendation. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Board Member Queen. Board Member Boozer Struther.
Thank you so much. First, I just wanted to ask a point of order, because we tabled the CEO's recommendations at the last meeting. So you're saying that the CEO's recommendations will not be voted on separately? Can you just explain how we got to where we are with the vote? And then I do have a substantive question.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask Mr. Thomas to respond, but I believe because this is a committee vote, it is going to be presented first. If it passes, then we go back to the original motion on the CEO's recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Is that correct, Mr. Thomas?
Can you restate that, Ms. Williams? I didn't fully hear you.
I said that because this is a committee recommendation, it is presented first. And if it passes, then it moves forward. It replaces the CEO's recommendation. If it does not pass, then we go back to Dr. Golson.
When you finish.
If it doesn't pass, then we go back to the original recommendation, and we will have to vote on that. But it will take 2/3 vote for us to go against the CEO's recommendation.
That is correct, as to the recommendation before you all from the committee.
Correct.
Correct.
Dr. Golson?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a note, and maybe Mr. Thomas can respond to this. According to House Bill 1107, the county board cannot implement a policy or take any action that contradicts the day-to-day management and oversight of the fiscal affairs of the Prince George's County Public School System by the CEO. So actually, this proposal that's presented contradicts the presentation that I presented already to the Board of Education. And it's a counter.
And so since this is a counter, we would need to have 2/3 vote to implement it. Is that what you're saying, Dr. Golson?
No, I'm saying I was under the assumption that because it's a counter, it could not be presented.
My understanding of the statute, as the language reads, is that a 2/3 vote would be required for this board to take action contrary to the action of the CEO, since the issue of school security, school safety is part of the day-to-day responsibilities of the CEO.
Accept it. I will accept the recommendation or statement from General Counsel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Golson. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Ms. Board Member Adam Stafford.
I didn't
I'm
finish.
sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was my first question. So I think, you know what, I would really like everyone to have clarity on if arrest powers are removed from school security, if there are no SROs in the schools, when there are the incidences that our security spoke to earlier tonight during public comment, when there are victims, and one might presume 911 needs to be called, is that where we will be? Dr. Goldson, can you explain that?
Based on what's presented tonight, yes, that is where we'll be.
Can I speak to that?
Not yet, Miss Adam Stafford. Ms. Boozer Struthers, do you have any more comments?
No, I just think everyone needs to understand what's being said here is that there will be no deterrent of security with arrest powers and the relationships that can come through that, as well as that 911 will be called. It's not as if students will not be arrested. It will be closest responding patrol officers who have no relationship to the school building. And that is what we are being asked to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boozer Struther. Next is Ms. Board Member Adam Stafford.
Yes. So I just wanted to clarify a few points in regards to Board Member Ahmed's recommendation in the recommendation of the committee. So in this, I think that we heard a lot from public comment about the fact that there was no real separation in the public sort of understanding to the messaging that they received between the SROs and security officers. And so with that, security officers would have arresting powers for adults, and they would not be able to arrest children. And so that is important. It's an important distinction to note because we want to ensure that we are continuing to maintain security guards within buildings that have training in de-escalation techniques and have those established relationships and can prevent the police from being called. As an educator for over a decade, I relied heavily on the security guards in the school building to be the eyes and ears on the ground to know how we can maneuver and support students. So in that, it's important to note that also, when we think about what are the alternatives, if we do not have armed police officers in the building, it's also just important to think about the fact that those armed officers are primarily policing students for nonviolent offenses. And they are also over-policing students in a way that is resulting in a large amount of students, particularly students of color, being arrested for fights that are not involving weapons or interpersonal conflicts or disruptions. These are all core components in pushing students into the school to prison pipeline. Students in my district have taken surveys and they've talked about the fear and the sort of the relationships that they have with officers walking around the building with guns and how they would prefer to have more counselors within their schools, to have more mental health supports as opposed to having an armed officer. We heard the data earlier about the fact that school resource officers are not deterrents to school shootings, which is a myth that is constantly discussed. And so we've seen models of this working all throughout the nation where schools form school safety teams, where they're able to prevent a lot of some of the sort of tense situations that can happen and diffuse those situations by working together using preventative methods. For example, trauma-informed practices, restorative practices, and again, of course, putting dollars towards personnel that can support students. And so I think, as we think about this, yes, police can be involved in providing safe passages home for students. They can be called if an incident needs to be raised to that level. But we send our students to school to learn, not to be policed. And that's what happens. When there is no crime being committed, then if someone that does not have that training and that background will create a situation that's not actually there. And so I would just urge my colleagues to really think about the distinction, to invest in our security officers and have them use their very successful diversion program, which is able to put students on a different path and really think about sort of the small distinctions within this recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Adam Stafford. Ms. Ms. Queen, you've already had a first round, correct? I'll come back to you in just a second. Ms. Nina Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Colleagues, have quite a few conflicting thoughts on the matter. I think the further and the more we've engaged in this conversation, I've stepped away with a lot more questions on both sides and in both directions. And I think something that's amazing to me is, just so you all and the public know, I think I've received the most student engagement on this issue compared to anything else the board has considered. And I think that's amazing. And I say that to say that we've had surveys, students have conducted surveys. I've spoken with students, different student organizations. I've tried to solicit student feedback. And I think, I wholeheartedly and genuinely say that you won't find a clear-cut consensus from students on where they stand on this matter. That's not to discount the experiences of students who've had negative interactions with SROs or school security, not at all. I mean, I've spoken to students who've experienced that, but that's also to say that, because of, you would say, maybe the current organization of our school system, the current powers that be, that you do have students for one reason or another who do find, security and safety in having SROs or having, school security on site. And I just think that it's important to realize that you have those two different perspectives and people in the middle. And those are perspectives that need to be reconciled. And so suffice to say, a few points I would like to uplift or raise. One, when it comes to removing SROs and also removing arrest powers from school security, I think a concern that I have and that I've heard, I think Board Member Boozer-Strother has spoken about, is that if you remove SROs and remove the arrest powers of some of our school security, you're leaving potential arrests of students in the hands of random, like off the street officers. I guess I would take this to mean that this could lead to an increase in more custodial arrests of students and fewer non-custodial arrests and diversions. And then something else I would like to uplift is that, yes, police are still available. 911 is always going to be available. But in a lot of cases, I've seen it firsthand. My peers have experienced it. If a situation has escalated to the need of having to call police, it's gotten pretty bad. There are fights, there are things that happen in school where you see security jump in, you see security swoop in, you see your SRO jump in, and inevitably stop a bad situation from getting worse. And last thing I would like to say is that when it comes to the arrest of students for a variety of different offenses, I would like to say that, I love our school faculty, I love our school leadership, but you have some staff members who don't properly utilize school security and don't properly utilize SROs. I think that's a problem. And I think if you have staff members who can't properly utilize the resources and tools the school system gives them, that removing SROs and removing arrest powers of ICs is only going to be a drop in the bucket. Those biases those staff members may have towards maybe Black or Brown students are going to manifest in other ways that will allow them to leverage these negative disciplinary consequences on our students further. And so those are just kind of me like spitballing my thoughts.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Next up is Ms. Belinda Queen, Board Member Queen.
Thank you so very much, Madam Vice Chair. Okay, I'm gonna try to do this without being Betty, but be Belinda, you guys, and be honest, okay? I say this all the time, you guys, that one of the things that MAPE has taught us, Maryland Association Board of Education, that we are the what and Dr. Thornton is the how. What bothers me the most is this is the second meeting that Dr. Golson, has actually read that HB 1107, which in all honesty, when we say what, she should be saying how. How can I get this done? And she should be telling us how, not reading that. So I really have a problem with that, first of all. So I want to express myself on that. The how to be, if we're asking for something, whether it comes from policy, whether a budget committee, we hire her as a CEO to do that. The problem I have is, why do people elect or appoint a board if we have a CEO who feels that the decision they make is it? and I'm gonna be honest with you, I have a problem with that. And I'm just gonna say it out to the public so everybody can hear it. That is not how it's supposed to be. We are the what? We ask that something be done, whether it's a policy committee or whatever. Doesn't matter what 1107 said. We are the what as a board. Her job is the how. So when it gets to that as a board, we need to start making a decision whether things are working for us as a whole. And I just want to address that.
Thank you, Board Member Queen. Dr. Golson?
Yes, thank you so much for that, Board Member Queen. So actually, the proposal that I presented before you today is the how. And this is the presentation that I presented to you all back in January and shared it before. So it is the how. And the decision that I have presented to you is one based on the responses from 13,027 respondents. And anything that I present to you, and this is an opportunity where we did do a survey, we received responses. 80% of those respondents said they want SROs in high schools. So the decision before you is one that is taken with firm consideration by the input from our community, not from Dr. Goldson's perspective. But I will say this as the CEO and as a former principal of 2 schools and an assistant principal, there is value in our security staff that presented today, as well as our SROs. There's no question about it. And the relationships that they establish with our students is of value. But our student voice is also important, and our students appreciate having security there. And as our board member stated, our student board member stated, our students also feel comfortable with school security, taking into a consideration a significant amount of response back from staff, students, parents, community members, additional surveys done by students is why I have presented the presentation that I presented in January and the board action summary for today. This is not Dr. Goldson's personal view. This is me as the CEO representing 13,000 of our community members who have responded. So thank you for providing that opportunity for me to clarify.
Thank you, Dr. Golson. Next up is Board Member Boozer Struther. For round 2, you have 3 minutes.
All right, thank you so much. And I just wanted to make a point of reiterating that the side of the equation that I'm sure we have consensus on is the additional services around mental health, restorative justice practices, working with organizations that work with at-risk youth, the proposal that Mr. Burrows will be putting forward for further exploration on these, that side of the equation and funding for that and continuing to grow that, I think is just not the question at all. This board has had consensus for years on that. The issue, here is that on the side of if a student does need the diversion resources, it is my understanding that somebody needs to arrest, they have to reach the point of arrest. And I want to be clear on that diversion is not an opinion of the principal or another administrator. I hope Dr. Goldson can clarify how some of these other resources do need to come into play to avoid those next steps in the criminal justice process.
So they are part of the recommendations that were presented in January around providing mental health supports, making sure we can continue with restorative practices, and ensuring ways that we can provide those consultation supports to our students. That piece is not changing. You're correct. That is the one area that we all have agreed on, that we need to continue to support, and we'll continue to increase mental health services and supports to our students.
Thank you.
Can you please clarify how a diversion program is accessed?
So we actually have a memorandum of understanding with our state's attorney's office where students who are receive what we call a J1 juvenile arrest, that they are referred to that diversion program. We have several partners who we have established that will work with students to do counseling, community service credit, and provide mentors and supports. And once those students have completed that process and earned a certain number of hours, then that J1 is expunged and no longer will be reviewed. And then those students we're hoping will not have to experience the situation that got them in that place in the first place. We already had that established. We started that, I want to say about, we had this discussion about a year and a half ago. Time flies when you're in a pandemic, but probably a little bit more than that. We solidified that MOU and are looking to move forward with it when we reopen school fully.
And that J1 is a power of currently of both. It's the same exact arrest power of an SRO or a security officer in
Correct.
PGC.
It is the documentation that you have to complete in order to begin the process for an arrest. Correct.
Thank you.
Chair Williams, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I'm just talking. Thank you, Dr. Golson and Board Member Boozer Struther. Next up is Ms. Nina Jackson for round 2. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. More spitballing, so just, bear with me. I think I would like to thank the board member who brought up also the piece about mental health. And I think this is a really powerful conversation to have because there's so many different moving pieces within our current body regarding what are we doing for students who need support services. And I think another concern that, I've expressed and that's been expressed to me is that, well, when you pull out SROs and when you pull out school security, again, which we've acknowledged, some of whom fill important support roles within their school communities, again, not the system as a whole, but individuals. My concern that I believe I have is, we're leaving a vacuum if we just pull these individuals out. I know, Dr. Goldson has continuously committed herself to increasing the number of support services we have available for students. A lot of you all as my colleagues have done the same, but one of the points I think it's important to also bring up is that what good is availability if there's no accessibility? Students have problems not only with lack of support services at their schools, but getting access to them. I say this as a student who's utilized my school counselor, utilized our wellness center, utilized our school psychologist, and that was after I was pushed to do it by school leadership. Like, hey, Nina, you should probably, go talk to somebody. And I say this to say again that when we have this conversation about support services in tandem with, students who are maybe at risk or students who come into contact with school security, accessibility is a huge thing. And so I think our school system needs to do something more about making sure our students are aware of these resources, regardless of whether they may need them or not in the moment. Another piece I would like to uplift with this in mind is that perhaps this could just be my young, idealism, perhaps. But I guess a question I would have is when it comes to the matter of school security, particularly around SROs, does it have to be one size fits all? And that's a genuine question. We say that our schools are like mini communities, mini towns, mini cities, and school leadership knows best what their community requires. And so a genuine question to administration, could a decision somehow, some way be made by school-based leadership or the school communities with engagement to PTSAs, students about what school security looks like?
Thank you for that question, Board Member Jackson. I think that's an excellent point that each school has different needs, which is why we also have student-based budgeting, which provides those options and allows PTSAs and staff members to begin to talk about how they can utilize school funds to help to support those needs. And we try our best to facilitate it through that process. But it's also important to know that we also have a law that requires a memorandum of understanding with our SROs, either having them in our building or ensuring that we create a provision that provides adequate law enforcement or support for our schools. And so what I can tell you is that we've had our labor partner for ASASP, which is the labor unit that represents our school administration. And there are principals who want to continue to keep SROs in their school security, but each school through SBB has the autonomy to increase or decrease that personnel. And that allows them not to have that one size fit all. So thank you for that question, because that was an opportunity to share that not everyone has the same number of security personnel in their buildings.
Thank you, Dr. Golson and Board Member Nina Jackson. I appreciate the comments. Next, person up is Ms. Adam Stafford for her second round. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, I'd like to just sort of harp on the fact again that there is really no evidence in Maryland or anywhere else that suggests that police presence actually decreases school violence. And I think for some time we can become so accustomed to and used to having police presence in schools, and we don't realize that it's actually very unnatural, right? And it actually happens more in schools where there are Black and brown children. And as we think about the availability of those mental health services for students, the national recommendation by American School Counselors is that we have 250 students to one counselor. In Prince George's County, we have about 362 students to one, and a ratio of 1,300 students to one psychologist. And so if we were to divert funds from this program that we can see is targeting students and possibly creating mental health issues from the trauma of that interaction, and divert that money into actual putting the counselors and psychologists in schools, that could actually support students in a much deeper way. And I just want to urge my colleagues to really think about, reimagining what school safety means. In light of the recent racial reckoning that our country has gone through, I want you to just think about what would it look like if we took a student that was behaving in a way that is sort of out of the norm that we would expect within a school building, and we used and really honed in on positive behavioral intervention systems, held a restorative circle with that student in their community, and rethought how we reintegrate them back into the classroom, because that's the goal, right? The goal is to educate the student. And so what I have seen too much of is that our Black boys specifically are pushed out, and our Black girls pushed out of the educational system by the biases and the prejudices that often educators may have or school leaders may have in not being able to have that support on the ground to deal with the student in the moment. And so I would just encourage all of you to really think about what this could look like if we are able to provide these supports to schools, help them develop safe teams, which many groups are in support of, and then, actually implement this as they have done with Fidelity in school districts that are comparable to ours throughout the nation. I really think this is an area where we can lead.
Thank you, Board Member Adam Stafford. Mr. Curtis Valentine, I see you, but Mr. Kenneth Harris was first. I will put you on the list, Board Member Valentine. Board Member Harris, your turn.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for acknowledging me. So I'm hearing our discussion back and forth, and looking at the recommendations of the CEO and the proposal from the Policy and Governance Committee, it appears there's a few areas that actually align, mainly 1A and 1D. So in the spirit of unity, I'd like to offer a substitute motion, potentially to accept the recommended board actions in the Protect Our Students proposal for 1A, which for the folks not in front of them, are the recommendation is to seek input from stakeholders that will impact by realignment, and 1D, which is annual data should also include referrals to diversion programs, which are acceptable by the CEO according to the notes here, and table the remaining 1B, 1C, and 1E until a later April or maybe even early May Board of Education meeting, because there's a lot of good information in here, but I think we need to focus on the points that we agree on at this point. You're on mute.
Thank you, Board Member Harris, for your you're making a substitute motion on Board Member Ahmed's motion. Is she accepting that? Are you accepting that? Well, this is a substitute, so it wipes it out, correct? Thank you.
I said second several times. And
I seconded.
Okay, thank you so much. I must remind you that because this is an alternate to the CEO's recommendation, it still will require 2/3 vote.
Madam Chair, just a point of clarification. I thought that tabling motions require a simple majority vote. Mr. Thomas, is that?
Mr. Thomas, can you?
Yeah, what I understood Mr. Harris's vote to state was that he is moving as a substitute motion that the board accept only the recommendations that are aligned with the CEO's recommended report, which would be 1A and B. He also moved that the board
1B.
would, yeah, I'm sorry. He also moved that the board would delay or postpone, I guess, the vote for the additional items. So I don't look at this as a motion to table. I look at this as a motion to postpone or reschedule the vote for the remaining items. There's a difference between a motion to table versus a motion to postpone.
I have another clarifying question. So this is just on the board member Ahmed's proposal, but I won't be tabling my recommendation that's presented to the board under consent agenda for today.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Golson, on that. So what occurs in this vote to postpone the items that we will not be voting on, and we will get clarification on that before we make the vote, we will still return to Dr. Golson's recommendation. Is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing, Mr. Thomas? You're on mute.
Dr. Golson has stated that she wants the board to consider the remainder of the recommendations. Correct, Dr. Golson?
Now, what they're discussing now is board member Ahmed's proposal. What I asked for the board to do is approve the CEO's recommendation, was item 6.8, and it's all of the provisions that are provided in the recommendation presented in January.
Okay, so
two separate issues.
Right, with that, I do agree with Dr. Golson then that the two would be separate issues to the extent that the board is right now considering its policy, its committee's proposal. So she is correct on that. I believe the board would still have to take a vote on the CEO's proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we will now take a vote on board member Ahmed's, but before we proceed with that, I think I would like to, unless Mr. Harris has anything else to add, before we take a vote on that, I would like to ask board member Valentine to provide his comments.
Thank you. I find it's an opportunity to really highlight, and this is one person who I think is doing an excellent job in our schools to support our young Black boys, young men who's been brought up on this conversation countless times. His name is Ernest Greene. He runs the Minimum Mate program at Wise High School, and is someone over the years has made tremendous impact and inroads with young boys of color, putting them into college, grad school, in his professional world. And there are a number of men and women in our school district who are doing amazing jobs to support our young people. And conversations like this oftentimes try to highlight or take advantage of certain narratives around our school system. But every day, there are men and women who wake up early and stay up late and do it without a lot of attention, not a lot of fanfare, and not a lot of politics. And people like Ernest Greene, whose name I just had to inject his name into this conversation, and all the men that he has touched over the years who are not on the right track, who are on their way to places where they should not have been. And he has grabbed them back and brought them in, and have had his support of SROs in the building, of security in the building, of which he is a member of the security staff there, and others who have put their arms around the young men of Wise High School, and other high schools that have come to Wise, and other schools, other leaders have come to Wise and said, how can I bring that to my school? Because this either or conversation, this trying to make it look black and white is to me is not the Prince George's County public school system I know. It's not the young men in my district that we know. These are young men that go every day try to do their best, and there are people waking up every day to do their best. And so this is why I think I just wanted to say his name. I'm not going to comment on anything else, but I want to inject Ernest Greene's name into this conversation, and other men and women like him who are doing everything they can for our school district. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Board Member Valentine. Let's see. I'm sorry, Ms. Nina Jackson, you have completed 2 rounds of comments, and the same for you, Ms. Stafford. Sorry that you cannot add any more to this conversation.
Madam Vice Chair, just a point of clarification. I think
Yeah.
because this is a different motion, there is more flexibility for other folks to speak based upon that.
Yeah, the other board members can speak, but both Adam Stafford, Boozer Struther, Nina Jackson have all spoken their first and second rounds already. There are other board members who have not spoken at all, who are able to speak if they choose to. Board Member Queen?
I think what she's saying is when Mr. Harris made that next motion, they can speak on his motion.
Oh, understood. I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. You are correct. Thank you very much for clarifying. I'm sorry. So we're going to go through this again. We're starting to discuss Board Member Harris's recommendation to accept certain recommendations from the committee and to table or postpone, I'm sorry, other items from the other recommendations from the committee. Are there any? I see hands are up. Thank you. Ms. Board Member Adam Stafford.
Thank you. I just wanted a point of clarification. Mr. Harris, were you saying that you wanted to postpone the meeting or to table the conversation?
Table.
So I just wanted to get some feedback from board council in terms of the threshold for passing that.
You're on mute. You're still on mute.
Mr. Harris, to clarify then, your request is to table as opposed to postpone?
No, sir. It's the table sections 1B, 1C, and 1E.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so if you're going to make a motion to table, there has to be a second on that motion to table for one.
We had a second. We had a
right.
second.
And my point earlier is that is different from a motion to simply postpone. When you are when you're doing a motion to table, you're basically stating that. Let me read this. If you're doing a motion to table, you're basically saying that the board is, tabling further discussion or action on that item, which means that when it is brought back up, the board has to also make a motion to remove the item from the table. So you don't necessarily have to do that if you're simply making a motion to postpone the vote on an item. So that's essentially the difference between a motion to table and just a simple motion to postpone or motion to delay.
Mrs. Williams, if I could just clarify, because I thought this was a mixed motion. It was to accept items 1A and 1D, and then to table the other 3.
For clarification, it's 1A and 1D. D is in dog.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Thank you. So are you suggesting, Ms. King, that we separate out this and vote for the ones that are to be accepted and the ones to be tabled, or can we just combine this into one and move forward?
I was just given the comments by Mr. Thomas. I just wanted to clarify what the actual substitute motion was on the table. I don't have a recommendation. I kind of defer to Mr. Thomas in that regard, but I just thought it was important to note that it does seem to be a motion to approve certain items as well as to table other items. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, and I think Ms. King's clarification is a correct one. He is moving to table certain items and moving to vote to approve the other items that he identified.
So since this is a mixture of 2 actions, one to approve and the other part to table, would it be appropriate for us to just take this as one vote?
Well, he's presented it as one vote, so I think you can certainly do that. The motion
Okay.
just needs to be clear on the action that the board is taking.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything else, Ms. Adams Stafford?
Two hands up.
Okay, I see you, Mr. Curtis Valentine. Just one second. Next up is Miss Nina Jackson.
Thank you. This is just a informational or substantive question for administration. I know a lot of colleagues here referenced the idea of care teams formed of different, staff members committed to, helping our students in crisis or facing disciplinary consequences. But I also know from experience that some of our schools have PBIS teams, or we have a countywide, the PBIS program. So I guess, Dr. Golston, if you could kind of elaborate on the role that program plays in our schools, or the role it's supposed to play in helping our students.
Yes, PBIS is a required component by Maryland State Department of Education. It's implemented from elementary, middle through all the way through high school. And in many of in our schools, we do have what was referenced here as a care team, but we do have teams of people within our school who do exactly what was shared this evening. Our professional school counselors play a role, our mental health providers, we have our school psychologists, as well as administrators and school security who also sit on this care team, for lack of a better term, that help to support students. And the use of restorative practices and circles are used to help to support students as well. So what we're proposing is still a continuation of those services. We wouldn't be removing those or discontinuing.
Thank you, Dr. Golson. Are there any other Mr. Valentine?
I guess my question is to Board Member Harris, who made the motion to table. I guess the question is tabling for what? Is there something else, more information you're looking for? Is there something that you want further clarification? Like, what is the condition on which you are tabling, and what do you seek to get out of that of this postponement?
So from the postponement, I felt it was just an ongoing conversation, and again, I had time to read through this doc several times since we started this conversation. So I saw there were several points where we aligned. So I figured to get the ball rolling, we should find our common ground and then come back to the points where we might not see eye to eye, and maybe even talk about those a bit more. That was my reasoning for tabling.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris and Mr. Valentine. Seeing no more comments, Ms. Berkeley, would you please call the roll and read the motion?
Yes, ma'am. Motion to accept the recommendations of the recommendations 1A and 1D as in dog of the Policy and Governance Committee's Protect Our Students proposal, and table the remaining portions of the recommendations 1B as in boy, 1C, and 1E until April.
Thank you, Ms. Berkeley. Mr. Burrows.
I wasn't going to speak on this, but I actually elevate one of the comments that Mr. Harris made in response to Mr. Valentine's question. This is definitely an issue that a lot of people feel very, very strongly about. There are legitimate fears of over-policing Black children, Black and brown children. There are fears about, what would it mean to remove SROs, and how do you keep students safe in that regard? And from the very beginning of this conversation, I feel like the board, the advocates, the administration, and a lot of the stakeholders have operated in silos, kind of with our lines drawn in the sand around these very important issues. And after speaking with people really who are all over the place on this topic, what I've come to understand is that there really is a lot more commonality than these recommendations or even this display on the floor tonight would present. There's a lot of common ground. And so, Ms. Valentine, you asked, why table it? What do you see happening differently? I would sign up to be a part of a conversation where we took the union, the administration, the advocates, the folks who want SROs out immediately versus the folks that want to keep them, and say, where are our lines in the sand? Let's get in the same room and come up with a consensus proposal. Of course, that should have happened well before this moment, but we are where we are tonight. And so I'm going to support Mr. Harris's motion with the hope that we could get a small coalition of members that represent different interests. Because when I initially spoke with the union about this, they thought that their voice was not heard. When I spoke with the advocates feel like this has been tabled so long, we wanted, they don't feel respected in this process. I know of some folks who legitimately say, what happens if there's an active shooter? People really say that. And then my response to that is generally, then why don't we have them at middle schools and elementary schools? Are their lives less important than high school? So certain parts of this, I just think if the board could show some leadership and bring these stakeholders together and come into a room and attempt to come up with a consensus proposal. That has not happened yet. And it's been so long that we've debated this. And I think it's worthwhile to attempt to do it. Now, if we can't do this by the April meeting, then so be it. Let's take an up or down vote. But I just think what we're about to do is, half the board's going to vote one way, the other half's going to vote another way. Then, the superintendent's going to say, this is my authority under the law. And then the lawyer might say something different. And
Thank you,
that.
Mr. Burrows. I'm sorry I don't think you heard the ding from Miss Berkeley, who's keeping the roll.
Oh, no, I didn't. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Thank you for your comments. Do you want me to sign you up for a round two?
Yes, please.
Will do. Next up, we have Miss Nina Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
You have 3 minutes. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Burrow's sentiments. I'm positive there are more areas for agreement than there are disagreements. I like to think that we all have the same goal in mind and just have different approaches of how to get there. But I guess one of the things I would like to share is that I think the administration's proposal seeks to do that. Now, granted, it wasn't, all of us in one room, discussing this and having dialogue, but I think they pulled from a lot of sources to come, to the table with the recommendations that they've delivered. I know some people have problems with the survey, but the survey was done. They took into consideration the recommendations from the county's police reform task force, took in community feedback. I'm sure she's received, a large amount of emails about the issue similar to us. I've shared with Dr. Goldson student feedback and student surveys about the issue. And I guess part of my concern is that we'll just continue kicking this down the road and kicking the can down the road. And so those are kind of like, I guess, my thoughts in the matter. I think Dr. Goldson's recommendations, the administration's recommendations, is a consensus. It is an attempt at a middle ground. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Next up, we have Ms. Shayla Adams Stafford, and after that, we'll have Mr. Curtis Valentine. Ms. Shayla, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, so I do agree, and I have been able to connect with a lot of different groups that have different views on this, and we've been able to get to this point with this recommendation. There was a lot of discussion, and I think that union advocates and community advocates, everyone would agree that we've come a long way from the very first proposal. But I do want to note that in thinking about the survey and the data that we're using to base these decisions on, many people in the community are, they feel as though the survey that was released was very biased. This survey didn't give a lot of background about the high rates of arrest. It had very leading questions. So for example, SROs are either safe or positive. Those types of questions don't give a lot of leeway for people to give their true feelings. And we also had, people being, it's called being a vulnerable subject when you're being surveyed by your employer. So you may answer those responses differently. And then there was not an option within the survey to increase counselors. So, I think that there is definitely room if we could take some time to pull in some more data, some more data points, some more resources, some more surveying, and possibly just some more conversation. Because as everyone has said, there are a lot more points here where we agree than where we disagree. And here's an opportunity for us to come together and just, ensure that we're putting forth something that, is indicative of all the voices in the room.
You're muted, Board Member Williams.
Thank you, Board Member Adam Stafford. Dr. Golson, do you have a comment?
I just wanted to clarify that I provide a response around the validity of the survey in January and shared once again that our research and evaluation team is the one that issued the survey, received the responses, do not have the actual names of the people who responded. The survey actually had comment sections so people could add any additional comments, which there were thousands of them, which I did read through all of those comments before doing the presentation, and also shared that the tool was shared in multiple languages, English, Spanish, and in French, and said, even if we were to throw out all the questions, question number 3, which I focused on and posted on the board action summary, states 80% of our families want to keep SROs in high schools.
I think you're muted there, but I think you want to. I think you said my name.
Goodness gracious. Next will be up is Mr. Curtis Valentine. After that, Board Member Burrows. You both will have 3 minutes apiece. Thank you.
And, I will say, and I agree with all my colleagues, we've come a very long way. If I think about the first time this was proposed back in June, it was proposed without much notification to the board, without much justification as it relates to particularly Prince George's County Public Schools. And this is something that those of us who opposed it when it first happened were, our love for Black children or Black Lives Matter was questioned because we didn't support this when it first came out. And we said, what if we had a task force? What if we had the community? What if we had the entire county come together and have a county-wide conversation with community members, with law enforcement, with legislators? What if we did that? What if we made it public? What if we had people who could come and testify? What if we had researchers and folks come in and they specifically to our county, how would this impact us? And what if we had teachers and school leaders and students and law enforcement and people who deal with our schools every day, not just sort of talk about them or look about it or read about them, actually go in and out of our schools every day? What if we had them comment? And what if we did a survey? What if we had 13,000 people respond? What if we did that? And we've done that. We've come a long way since June, and we've come a long way towards reconciling a lot of the things that have happened and putting a lot of things on the table. But I don't think anything is going to change between now and the next meeting. And so I'm proud of our county for really coming together on this topic, for bringing together a county-wide conversation, public conversation, not just on the school board, but as a system. And I'm proud of the voices of those who come forward, all the students, all the parents, all the teachers, all the administrators, everyone who is at the table and is going to be impacted by this directly after we take this vote. And so I appreciate the conversation that we've having as a board and the collaboration we've had over the last 9 months around this, because again, we've come a long, long way since This was proposed without much notice or justification at the time. And so I'm proud of the administration's ability to go out and to gather information. I'm proud of our county in this task force, and I'm also proud of all the students who put their name, and I'm proud, most importantly, of our student member, Jackson, for her leadership and her voice in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Valentine. Next up will be Board Member Burrows, and then after that, Ms. Queen, your hand was up, but I see that it's gone. Do you still want to speak, Board Member Queen?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Burrows?
Yes, I just want to say, I think we're missing a real opportunity to get this right. I am going to vote no on the recommendations. I think that there are unresolved issues that we could unify around. For example, if there's going to be a legal maneuver to say that you need 2/3 and clearly they're not 2/3 present, could we agree that that the school, a parent, a student, a civic association leader should have a role in the selection of which officers in their school? Like, what is that process like? I've spoken to other board members on other sides of this issue who can't articulate that. Why can't we have community involvement with who's in our school? What happens right now at Crossland High School if there is a use of force incident? Does every student know what to do? Does every parent know what to do? What is the oversight to ensure that if something untoward happens to one of our students, that we're notified? I mean, there's clearly some common ground that we can come around that. And so, I mean, there are other issues that I want to raise, but I just think it's unfortunate that we're not going to be able to unify to try to work together on issues where there could be a lot of agreement.
Thank you so much, Mr. Burrows. Seeing no more comments, Ms. Berkeley, would you please call the vote to that was presented by Board Member Harris to accept items recommendation 1A and 1D like dog for the protect our students recommendation from the committee, and table 1B, 1C, and 1E until April. I believe that's a summary of what we're about to vote on. Ms. Berkeley, would you please call the vote?
Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Adams Stafford.
Aye.
Mrs. Ahmed.
Yes.
Ms. Boozer Strother.
No.
Mr. Burrows.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Ms. Jackson.
No.
Mr. Montero.
No.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Mrs. Queen.
Yes.
Mrs. Shepherd.
No.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Valentine.
No.
Mrs. Williams.
No.
7 ayes, 6 nays, 1 absent.
Thank you. That motion doesn't pass. We go back to the recommendation of the CEO.
Point of order, Madam Vice Chair, I think we go back to the motion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the motion.
I am so.
To approve. It's okay. It's like 10 p.m. So everybody gets some grace right now. The motion on the floor for the policy committee recommendation.
Thank you, Board Member Ahmed, for that correction. I appreciate that. And back on the original motion, we've had 2 rounds of discussion. So I would think that we are ready to call the vote. Ms. Berkeley, would you please call the vote on the original recommendation from the Policy and Governance Committee?
Yes, ma'am. This is the motion to approve the Policy and Governance Committee's recommendations outlined in the Protect Our Students proposal, correct?
Correct.
Mrs. Adams Stafford.
Aye.
Now, Mrs. Ahmed.
Yes.
Ms. Boozer Strother,
No.
Mr. Burrows,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson,
Abstain.
Mr. Montero,
No.
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
Mrs. Queen,
Yes.
Mrs. Shepherd,
No.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
No.
and Mrs. Williams.
No.
7 ayes, 5 nays, 1 abstention, 1 absent.
We had someone who was absent?
Dr. Miller.
Dr.
Oh,
Miller.
I'm sorry. She didn't call the names. I'm sorry. Okay, that motion failed. We are now back to the recommendation of the CEO.
So moved.
And, excuse me?
I said so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion around this this item? Mr. Burrows, you have your mic open. Did you want me to call on you?
I just wanted to raise one point that I forgot to mention. It's still on topic, related to the survey. You know, if you send out an opinion survey, I question the survey for many reasons, and I want to know if that's the way that we're going to do business moving forward. Because if I send out a survey to ask parents and students if we should have the appropriate counseling and mental health services supports in our schools with the ratios that Ms. Adams Stafford mentioned that are recommended, they would say yes. They would. If I sent out a survey and I said, in our lowest performing schools, should we have nationally board certified teachers? Everyone would say yes. And I can go on and on. And so if that's the way, if we're going to do business, and I'm okay if that's the case, like we're going to poll the public and make decisions in that way, then I would like to do that on a host of issues, because I know the public would agree on some of these other issues, but that's just not the way that that's not the way that we've operated. And also, I think if in that survey, if it would have said, would you be okay with having an SRO whose only job was to protect against death or serious bodily harm? I think the answer would have been yes. Or do you want to have a role? Do you believe school leaders and community members should select and govern which officers in their school? I think the community would have said yes. And so I just think the argument around the survey really disturbs me, and it doesn't feel like it disturbs me. I just wanted to raise that.
I'd like to respond to Board Member Burrows.
Thank you. Dr. Golson?
Sure. Thank you so much for that. I sure hope we don't get into the business of doing opinion surveys, but this was a follow-up from the September 17th board meeting where the board voted and requested that I send out a community survey to see how people felt about SROs. So I would have preferred not to have done it, but I actually followed up on the decision made by the board on September 17th.
Thank you, Dr. Golson. Next up, we have Ms. Ahmed, Board Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. One question for clarification, and then I just wanted to say a couple things. The question for clarification is, this motion, are we moving to approve the item that says BAS for SROs on board docs? Is that what we're voting on right now? That document?
Yeah.
Ms. King, can you read the board action summary title that we're voting on in reference to the CEO's recommendation?
Just one moment, I'm gonna pull it up on board docs.
Thank you.
Yeah, as Ms. King is doing that, I can just share some of my comments to save some time.
Sure.
Colleagues, I've been very firm in my resolve on very many of these items and these issues. I'm firm in that I don't believe that armed officers belong in our school buildings. I do like very many of the recommendations that were from the police reform work group. I think we could go beyond that, and we should go beyond that. And the reason why I wasn't as vocal in this meeting is really, I feel like I heard a lot from y'all on where you stand, but I haven't been as vocal here because I feel like I've been very vocal over the course of the past year in different ways with different folks and reaching out to y'all individually or collectively on different issues as it relates to this item. And so I want to thank you for having those conversations with me. And I'm going to be, I'll be frank, I'm going to be a little bit disappointed, very disappointed, I should say. I shouldn't undermine it. I'm going to be very disappointed if we aren't able to do what I think is needed and necessary. But I respect each person's opinion and their values and wanting to vote the way that they do. And so that's all I wanted to say. Ms. King, could we come back to this item of what are we voting on?
Yes, actually, I was able to pull it up on board docs. It's labeled Board Action Summary, an outline of the Chief Executive Officer's recommendation to the Board of Education, with the subject being school resource officers.
Okay, thank you, Ms. King.
Thank you so much. Next up is Miss Nina Jackson, student board member.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Colleagues, I appreciate some leeway. It is now 10 o'clock and a little past my bedtime. With that being said, I think we keep bringing up the survey, and I think reducing the fashioning of the SRO or the school security recommendations down to the survey is just slightly reductive. I don't think administration is hanging their hat on the survey. And we've all received feedback from stakeholders. We've all, or a few of us, a handful of us, we've done the footwork and we've done the groundwork. We've all reached out to community members, we've received emails, and the survey keeps getting brought up into the conversation because it's one of the ways we've been able to quantify feedback from community stakeholders. I think it's important to note again that, hate the survey, love the survey, what have you. The numbers aren't going to give you a consensus on where the community stands on the matter. We've already demonstrated, we've already expressed that the community, spans the spectrum of where they stand on it. And I don't want us to get caught up on the survey, especially considering the work we've all done. And those are my thoughts on the matter.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson, for those comments. Board Member Queen.
Thank you so very much, Madam Vice Chair. I guess, with me, and I respect my colleagues, even, the student board member opinion, but I have to get caught up on the survey because of the fact that 45% of staff completed that survey and only 39% parents and 13% of our students and 3% community members. So, it still go back to me that we got so many letters from community leaders that some probably didn't do the survey, some probably sent their letter in. So many people have spoken out on it. And there's no offense to the staff, but they're hired, for that job. And, I think it makes a difference of how our students and our community members and our parents feel when it comes to that survey. I'm really really don't know how to vote on this. You guys, I'm really a little confused because I still have a problem with SROs being in the school. I'm gonna be honest, it has nothing to do with school security. I just don't think that we need school resource officers in this. And it's probably because as a parent who have raised so many kids within the school system, and some of my kids has experienced the trauma, and I hear you guys, but until your daughter had to come home and tell you the story of an SRO putting handcuffs on her and roughing them up, you don't know how it feels. See, I know how it feels because I have to listen to it, and my kids have to do to deal with it. Until your child or someone you know experienced that, it's a big difference. And I'm just sorry, it's a big difference from school security than SROs. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Queen. Board Member Adam Stafford.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up a couple of additional points regarding the survey that I think are important, because when we're talking about the basis of a lot of these recommendations, they are rooted in what the survey has brought back. But inherently, this survey, when we think about the representation of the amount of students that took the survey, only 13% of students took the survey, 45% of the survey respondents were parents. And there was no qualifier to say if you even lived in this county to take that survey. People have contacted me and said that people took the survey from all around America. I also have gotten, just that concept that there was not a clear delineation between security officers and SROs. As someone who's worked in urban public schools, students, parents, everyone refers to, they might refer to a security guard as an SRO, use those terms interchangeably. So when you say, do you want to get rid of SROs? No, I love the security guard that lets me in the building every day. That's my friend that talks to me, that helps me when I'm, wilding out in class. Those types of conversations that could have been very clearly delineated, and really for a survey to be, truly valid, if we could have taken and done focus groups from the results of that survey with, subgroups based on the data that we received, then we could actually make a true policy recommendation. But to base all of this off of, this survey, I do think that that's something that, I would urge my colleagues to reconsider. And I think that, that's just something that I wanted to raise.
Thank you, Board Member Adam Stafford. Dr. Golson, is there anything that you can bring some clarification on who was able to access the survey, or are you okay with the statements that are put out there?
I think it's very clear where everyone stands around the survey. I do want to clarify that we did provide some definitions at the beginning of the survey around security, what's security and what are SROs. But at this point, honestly, everyone has their thoughts around it. Once again, I agree with Nina Jackson. The recommendations that I put forward are not because of the survey. They're actual recommendations that were reviewed by the Police Reform Task Force Group. And they do address the whole child, as well as reducing suspensions, which supports our pipeline to prison.
Thank you, Dr. Golson. Ms. Nina Jackson, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Dr. Gold, I was going to ask a question. Dr. Goldson alluded to it. One of the things was mentioned that, we should have done focus work groups. We should have met with stakeholders in small groups to go over the data. I would just like to put forth the notion that we have the autonomy to do that as individual board members within our respective constituencies. I certainly can't reach out to all 134,000 students. Trust me, I've tried. It's not gonna work. However, I have, tried to reach out to individual pockets of students, as much as I can to, review the data with them, to answer any questions, to solicit feedback. I've shared some of that feedback with Dr. Goldson. I've taken to her questions I've gotten from students. I had students say to me, hey, these recommendations make no sense. And, I've discussed that with the CEO regarding her recommendations. And I just think, we all have the autonomy and the ability as individual board members to, again, do as much legwork as we can. We're not going to get, the majority consensus that we're looking for. I believe we've all done the work that we can to reach out to community stakeholders, to reach out to advocates, to reach out to, individuals who fall on either side of the spectrum. And I want to make sure we're not dismissing those of us who have done the work. 'Cause I know, board member Ahmed, she's put in amazing amount of work regarding this. She's taken my questions. We've had hour-long phone calls regarding what feedback she's gotten from the community, and similar to the rest of you all. So that's something I just wanted to uplift in the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Seeing no other comments, I just want to say something quickly. This is not I think that because we have these differences in the conversation, we are not saying that we can never revisit this conversation again. So I appreciate all the work that every board member has done in the community with board members and all of that. But at this point, I think we are done with the discussion, and I would like to have Ms. Berkeley call the roll.
Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Adams Stafford.
No.
Mrs. Ahmed.
No.
Ms. Boozer Strother.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows.
No.
Mr. Harris.
No.
Ms. Jackson.
Yes.
Mr. Montero.
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
No.
Mrs. Queen.
Can you come back to me?
Mrs. Shepherd.
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
No.
Mr. Valentine.
Yes.
Mrs. Williams.
You're muted, Ms. Williams.
You're muted, Mrs. Williams.
You're muted, Ms. Williams.
Oh, I'm sorry. You didn't hear me say yes. I'm sorry. Yes.
Returning, Mrs. Queen.
No.
6 ayes, 7 nays, 1 absent.
Thank you. The motion passes. Whew, that was a long discussion. I appreciate all you all hanging in there. We are now on.
Can I raise a point of order?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Burrows.
What was the vote count?
6 ayes, 7 nays, 1 absent.
This is for Mr. Thomas. Under HB 1107, the law says that a motion is passed by an affirmative vote of 7 if the student board member cannot vote, and 8 if the student board member can vote. How did this motion pass if the law spells out that it would need 8 votes if the student board member can vote?
Yeah, you're correct, Mr. Burrows. It would require 8 votes since the student board members' vote does count. So based upon the count as was read back by the board office assistant, this motion did not pass.
But Mr. Thomas, just a reminder that this falls under the supermajority vote.
Wait a minute, let me check. Oh, that is correct. It does require a 2/3 vote, as I explained at the beginning of the proceeding, or at the beginning of the discussion on the item.
Just clarifying.
So meaning in order to overturn the recommendations of the CEO, as I provided information to the board at the beginning of the discussion, it would take a 2/3 vote, including the student board members' vote. And that 2/3 would be a vote of 9.
Okay, Ms. Thomas, I didn't hear a vote. I didn't hear a motion to overturn anything. I heard a motion to approve the recommendation. And so.
Well, it was a motion to approve the recommendation, but that motion, in effect, if you're going to say that you all are rejecting the CEO's recommendation in this instance, it would require a vote of 9 to do that.
I guess my question is, if the law says that if the student board member can vote, the only way that motion is to pass, you need 8. And there was a motion on the floor to approve a recommendation, and it didn't get 8 votes. I'm just trying to understand, how do you reconcile what is squarely, clearly written in the law?
Right. So again, the motion on the floor was to approve the recommendation of the CEO, which in effect would mean if the board is going to, well, it's kind of the contrary. So the motion on the floor was to approve the recommendation of the CEO. That motion failed to the extent that you would need a vote of a majority of vote of 8 on that. So I guess the appropriate motion at this point would be whether or not there's a motion to disapprove or overturn the recommendation of the CEO, which would require, in fact, the 9 vote to overturn CEO's recommendation. And I know that may sound confusing, but I think that's where the board is procedurally, because you haven't voted to accept the recommendation of the CEO. So I think the next step would be whether or not the board wants to take a motion to determine if you're going to overturn or reject, the recommendations in the board action summary, in which case it would take the supermajority 2/3 vote.
So I guess my question then becomes, if the board, because I'm not hearing that it was the intent of the body to reject it, and I'm also not seeing the will of the majority to approve it. And so then what?
Well, if the board gets to that point where you all can't make a decision or take action on it, I think it would have to come back to the board for further consideration at your next meeting. What I suggested this evening, however, is, based on the language of how the motion was read, to accept recommendation of CEO, there was an insufficient number of votes to pass that. So, to move this issue forward, if a board member wants to make a motion to overturn or reject the recommendation or actions of the CEO, that would require a 2/3 vote. Otherwise, I think that the board would have to bring this item back for consideration at your next meeting.
Understood. So it's basically your legal opinion as our counsel that if there is no motion to overrule and there's no motion to accept that passeth, this would have to come back at the next meeting.
Yeah, I think the board would have to take, would have to further consider, additional action.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Burrow.
Madam Vice Chair, a point of clarification for Mr. Thomas. So this vote did not pass.
The vote for accept recommendation of CEO, that did not pass.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I think the options for the board this evening is to make the opposite motion to see if there is a motion to overturn or reject the recommendations of the CEO, which would require the 2/3 vote to do that.
So what you said,
Mrs.
go ahead,
Williams,
Ms.
if I could just ask a question, because I'm wondering if this particular item, because it falls within the operations of plant item, if this is treated differently than kind of your other recommendations from the CEO, because I thought because it fell within the operations of plant, it was presumed to, how to say this, it carries a certain amount of weight such that it would be approved unless it was overturned by a 2/3 vote of the board.
so I guess the question that we're asking is there a motion on the floor to reject the CEO's recommendation?
I move motion to reject the CEO's recommendation.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second. Thank you. Is there any, yes, Board Member Valentine?
This is a question to Dr. Thomas, based on Ms. King's comment. It's something that we've dealt with over the last 8 years, since that bill passed. And in the past, when the CEO made recommendations, particularly as it relates to operations, that when there was not a majority vote, because it was the will of the CEO that it would pass. Is that something that was that is not in line with the recommendation, Mr. Thomas?
State that again, Mr. Valentine. I was looking at one of the statutes.
No, I was saying in the past, when it comes to operations, when the CEO brought forth a recommendation that if the board did not have the 9 votes to reject it, that the recommendation of the CEO would pass, not with the majority, but would not pass if there was not a super majority to oppose.
So the scenario that you're describing obviously happens with respect to employee appeals. In this instance, the statute, as the board has discussed a few times now, requires that the board have a 2/3 vote in order to take action contrary to the recommendation of the CEO. So, I think that is the statutory requirement in this case.
And so, to your point, the recommendation of the CEO is the is the school and safety recommendation. That is her recommendation, and it will be a recommendation unless the board opposes it with a 9-vote majority. Is that not your interpretation?
Correct.
So in that case, does the school safety and security move forward as a recommendation of the CEO in spite of not getting a majority of the vote?
In this instance, if you all don't have the 2/3 vote to reject it, it would move forward.
It would, or it just did. I mean,
it would move forward. It did move forward.
Okay, just for clarification, so it did move forward, and it will, and Dr. Golson will move forward with the plan. Is that correct, Dr.?
Yeah, and I think I may have misspoken or confused what I was saying when I was talking about taking the opposite approach, because in fact you all didn't have the 2/3 vote to take an action contrary to the CEO, which would in essence mean her proposal did and should move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, because there were not 9 negative votes, the CEO's recommendation moves forward.
And so any recommendation, any motion from Ms. Boozer Strother, I don't think is necessary.
I agree.
Thank you. Ms. Boozer Strother?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make that point again, too, that it was my understanding because in September, we voted for the CEO to come back in January with a reform plan. So at that point, is my understanding that we would be here at this point, that we've asked for a reform plan, but there'd have to be a no because we've already asked for the reform plan. So I feel like it stands unless there's an over that there wasn't the 9 votes, that if there are 9 votes against it, that's my understanding of where we were.
Thank you. Mr. Burrows?
Yeah, I would just like to say, it is very clear to me that I just heard 2 very different things. I asked very specific questions. My question was, how many votes did this motion need to pass? And the answer was 8. And then I asked, what happens if this plan is not approved? And then I was advised that a motion to reconsider would need to happen, or a motion to reject the CEO's recommendation would need to happen, and that would require a 2/3 vote. And then I asked, what happens if neither of those motions pass? And the advice that we all got, and we're here in a public meeting in front of everyone, was that it would be pushed off to the next meeting. And then Mr. Valentine had a different line of questioning, and now it's automatically passed, even though the law says that it takes 8 votes to pass a motion when the super member can vote. And so I'm hearing too many different things here to make me comfortable at all with what is occurring. And I just wanted to say that for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Burrows. So if I understand the clarification that was made by Mr. Thomas is that because we did not have 9 votes in the negative, that the CEO's recommendation will move forward. With that said, at this hour of 10:32, we move on to item 6.9, policy 1100, community schools. Board Member Ahmed, would you please present the recommendation from the Policy and Governance Committee?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair. Colleagues, the purpose of policy 1100 community schools is to ensure that all students in PGCPS can achieve at high academic levels and that all PGCPS families, students, and staff, as well as other key stakeholders, share the responsibility for student success in order to contribute to thriving communities. What is before you right now are some revisions to the policy. The committee voted unanimously to forward this policy to the full board with a recommendation that the policy be sent out for public comment. Per policy 9340, if advanced by the board, the policy will be posted on the PGCPS webpage and publicized by the school district for community input for a period no later than 2 weeks. After public comments are received, the committee will consider the public comments and recommend any further revisions before making a recommendation to the board to approve the final version of the policy. So what is before you right now is a motion to send this policy out for public comment on the PGCPS webpage. And I move on behalf of the committee to do so.
Thank you, Board Member Ahmed. And we're voting to send it to the community for comment. And since it's been moved on behalf of the committee, a second is not required. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, can we just take a consensus vote on this? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposition to this? Thank you. Hearing none, any abstentions? Hearing none, we have approved for it to go to public, to be put on posted so we can have public comment. Next up is first reader. These items are being brought to the board to approve that we accept them into first reader. Board Member Ahmed, let me see, I'm sorry. If you all are in agreement, can we take these as a block and move forward? So I'm going to put on the table the recommendation that we vote to accept these into first reader. Can I get a motion for that? Unless someone wants to discuss any of these. I mean, we can't discuss it. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Queen. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? Hearing none, we have accepted all 3 items, 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3 into first reader. Moving along to second reader item, unfinished business. The first item up is 8.1, Climate Action Plan Focus Work Group. Board Member Boozer Struthers and Student Board Member Nina Jackson, please introduce this item.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. As we voted on at the last meeting to move this to second reader, this is a proposal for a focus work group on for a climate change action plan for PGCPS that is focused on clean energy schools, clean energy transportation, buses, and goes a little farther and also looking at some other issues such as storm water management and also food production and waste and possible composting programs. As presented here, there are the committee bios and the work plan is outlined in accordance with the focus work group policy of the board. With that, I would ask Ms. Jackson if she would like to make a final statement on this proposal.
Nothing else to add.
Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Boozer Strother and Student Board Member Jackson. May I have a motion? Or was that your motion, Ms. Boozer Strother?
I move for acceptance of this focus work group and the Clean Energy Schools resolution that accompanies the work plan.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Any discussion? Hearing none and seeing none. Ms. Berkeley, can we please call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Adam Stafford.
Aye.
Mrs. Ahmed.
Yes.
Ms. Boozer Strother.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Ms. Jackson.
Aye.
Mr. Montero.
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Mrs. Queen.
Yes.
Mrs. Shepherd.
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Valentine.
Yes.
And Mrs. Williams.
Yes.
13 ayes, 1 absent.
Thank you for that, board colleagues. Next up is item 8.2, Equity Hubs. Board Member Adam Stafford, would you please introduce item 8.2?
All right, no problem. So first, I just want to thank all of my board colleagues who supported this unanimously on first reader, and all of the members of the Academic Achievement Committee who also supported this as we discussed it more in committee. And I'd like to thank Dr. Goldson and her staff. We've had a chance to connect with them, and we're hoping to connect more this week to talk about how we can support our most vulnerable students. And so the Academic Achievement Committee met virtually on February 3rd with myself in attendance as committee chair, Nina Jackson, Dr. Juanita Miller, Sandra Shepard, and Curtis Valentine, and board members Belinda Queen and Edward Burrows were there as guests. And during the meeting, we discussed the attached board action summary, which is available on board docs. And after the proposal, the committee voted unanimously to recommend that the Board of Education fully approve equity learning hubs without the inclusion of student numbers or budgetary amounts, and that the administration will work to provide those numbers, and that the administration would collaborate with the Board of Education in a small committee to provide additional information before implementation, such as identification of community partners with the capacity to do the work, information about transportation, and a timeline for implementation. So we'd like to have it considered for this meeting as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Stafford. Is that your motion on the table?
Yes.
Is there a second? Thank you, Board Member Queen. Are there any discussions on this item? Board Member Valentine.
Thank you very much. And thank you for Board Member Adam Stafford for her initiative and leadership on this issue. I think it's important that we identify ways to ensure that students who have not been served to the fullest of their ability over the last, while we were closed, are served. I know when we did vote for this prior, and my colleague actually discussed that, there were some things that we wanted to put in place before we did move forward with directing the administration. A couple of those things included ensuring that we had a number of community partners who had the skill and everything, and all the preconditions to do this. At the same time, this was proposed prior to schools reopening and us having access to in-person instruction. At the same time, we had a meeting, and we had a great partner from Montgomery County come in and discuss their equity hubs and what everything it took financially, community-wise, the system they put in place. And one thing that jumped out to me is they were planning for over a year in order to get this done. And so I guess my question to you, Dr. Golson, is if this passes, how does this fit into, first of all, our budget, but also your plan to reopen schools? And is this something that you would recommend from your position as someone who right now we are charging as CEO to open our schools safely and within the budget?
As shared during the Academic Achievement Committee, we are committed to supporting the learning hubs, but we first were focused on the reopening of schools. Based on our survey results, all of our schools will be utilized beginning April 8th with students and staff. And so we'll have to work with community partners to find locations for those learning hubs to be located. In addition, as shared in the presentation from Montgomery County, a lot of the financial support for their learning hubs came from outside resources. The majority of those funds did not come from this school system. And so we will have to find the partners who be willing to support financially those learning hubs. There was a very small contribution made by the school system. And we have to see where we are at the end of this budget cycle, as well as the FY22 requests that we're putting through. But we will find a way to create, the learning hubs are like daycare centers to be located strategically, but they won't be able to be in our schools because once again, we are opening April 8th with 31% of our students there Monday through Friday, and the exception is Wednesday, is the day that the facility is thoroughly sanitized and cleaned in the middle of the week.
And so I guess my question is, I mean, to your point, in many districts, have been using district buildings. Our buildings will be utilized, and obviously for safety reasons, they'll be restricted. My question is, what will happen if we cannot find the community partners to sustain?
I'm gonna remain optimistic that we'll be able to find someone who'll be willing to assist in doing this. I'm sure there are some community partners that be willing to assist. So I'm going to remain optimistic. If it looks that we've beaten the pavement and we can't find anyone, then I'll definitely come back to the board to share that, but we're going to do our best to see if we can find.
Can I ask one final question?
I just wanted to say thank you. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
One final question. I imagine some folks who are listening in have a question around selection of students and who's going to be chosen to benefit from this. Can you talk a little about that, Ms. Adams-Stafford, about how the committee came about and made recommendations to the administration on which children would get in? I imagine there are a lot of parents who are listening thinking, wow, this is definitely going to impact my child. But unfortunately, this is somewhat a pilot. So can you discuss that, please?
Yes, so thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Golson. It's just so great that, the administration is really going to work with us to try to find a solution for these students that have really truly been disconnected. So I think the question was about selection, and the concept here would be that we would work with community schools to basically leverage their partnerships and relationships with families to identify students that have been disengaged totally from distance learning, that have significant home situations that, sort of preclude them from being a part of the classroom. And targeting those students, we also have a GEARS grant that's helping us to identify students that have been disconnected. Additionally, identifying specifically students that have the overlay of several indicators. There may be special needs, but then also maybe English language learning and have not logged on in a consistent fashion. So we're really looking for schools to be the experts. They're the ones that have their hand on the pulse, that can really try to bring in the students that are really the most at risk. And I think we're also going to, we talked about in our meeting with Dr. Goldson, was really trying to look also at our foster care students, our students that are homeless, students that may not have the adequate resources to engage online. Because, when we look at the learning loss that these students will, experience from losing a year of learning, we just can't let that happen. So I want to thank Dr. Golson and her team and just all of the folks on the Academic Achievement Committee that have supported this.
I do want to be
Thank you.
clear though, the best
Go-
place for a disengaged student is in the schoolhouse, which is why we are opening April 8th.
Thank you. Next up, we have Board Member Boozer Struther.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. I just want to thank Ms. Sam Stafford for raising the issue of daycare, and this has been huge problem in our county. We have professional daycare licensed centers closing. We have nonprofit partners whose seats have been empty, and and these are partners who can manage COVID. And when they had funding in Q4 of 2020, when there were sudden closures, Maryland State Department of Education funded these seats. We were able to utilize these, and this is the beginning of distance learning. So the providers actually already have some skills in this, but the funding isn't there. I personally think our school funding needs to go to our school programs, but I want to say that I think community schools, and especially our new impending partnership with Eros and the networks and the elected officials who I think are joining us tonight, this is a full county community issue. This is a state issue, a national issue to fund daycare, because they are closing, and this is going to be one of the most negative impacts from COVID. So I'm glad we're starting somewhere, and I appreciate Dr. Goldson's engagement in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Boozer Struther. Board Member Queen.
Thank you so very much again, Madam Vice Chair. I just want to say thank you also, Board Member Adam Stafford, for bringing this up, and Dr. Golson and staff for definitely looking into this to see what we can do about having this to help the most needed students. And why, I do have the floor, I want to reach out to say to all who is listening and all who will listen later, if you have available space for us to have a learning hub, if you want to partnership with us, please reach out to Prince George's County Public Schools, Dr. Golson and Dr. And our staff. I mean, I think we have so many places within our county that we should be able to use. And we need to really think about, maybe even writing letters. We have a lot of recreation centers with a lot of space. We have our libraries with a lot of space. It was mentioned we have a lot of daycare centers, and a lot of your churches have a lot of big space in it. So I ask that you please take the time, because it's about putting our kids first. It's about getting the most needed kids who are in need of making sure that they get their education. So if you have the means, or someone who have the means to be a part of this and help us with learning hubs, please reach out to us on this. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. And just one,
Thank you.
sorry.
Go ahead.
So
Go ahead.
one note I wanted to make about this, as we think about partnerships with communities, and I'm so grateful that you brought that up. There are several organizations that are interested in supporting this important work, because even with a hybrid model, students, will not be in school the entire week. So students that are disengaged now at home with virtual learning, even in a hybrid model, they still will be disengaged. And so that's why the concept of these hubs are so important. And I'm just, again, so grateful for the support for this.
Thank you, Board Member Stafford. Seeing no other questions, I just had one question, one comment and question. I think that the need for this is definitely something that's in the community. With the fact that we have students that will be in the building 2 days out of the week, and in 3 days they're home doing the hybrid learning. Parents are hearing this, and we had only about a little more than 30% of our parents said that they would participate in coming into the buildings for the hybrid learning. So my question is, based on all the unknowns that we've talked about, finances, the selection, the partners, the location, what is your earliest you anticipate something like this being available to parents, because they're listening to this and they may be trying to make decisions on how to participate? What is the earliest you think that something like this can happen?
I'm going to be cautious on giving a date, because I'm a woman of my word. And I do not want to give a date or a month or a time, and I can't execute it. I
And I
will
was
say,
gonna say, oh,
yeah, I mean, we're gonna, move forward, but we gotta find locations, then those places have to be approved, like they have to be sites that are
Mhm.
MSDE approved to have daycare sites, because
Mhm.
MSDE is not gonna come out and do a new assessment of locations. Like there's several
Correct.
requirements we have to do. So I would not want to say May
Okay.
1 and then I can't meet it. I try my very
Okay.
best. When I tell people I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't have parents with an expectation that when we came back to school, that this would be an option. So thank you for making that
We won't be able to
clarification.
do that, no.
Board Member Queen, you
Yes,
want to
yes.
do a round two?
Yeah, I just want to say my last remarks, you guys. I say this all the time, only together we can make a difference. And when I say together, not just as a board and not just as a school system, with our person, with our county leaders, our CEO and our governor, but with our communities. So again, I reach out to our community, our staff, our nonprofits, anybody who know where any extra money is that the school system can use to help with these programs, any grants, please let us know, because only together we can make a difference to make sure that our kids have everything they need to succeed. With me, it's so important that we put our kids first for a change. So whatever our students need to succeed, we want to be able to provide them, but we need your help. If you know of any place that could be a resource, please have them reach out. If you know of any available funds that would even help out with this, please reach out to us and let us know, because we are in this together. Parents, students, staff, community members, we need you all to work together so Prince George's County Public School students can succeed. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Board Member Queen. Seeing no more questions or comments, can Ms. Berkeley, can you call the roll, please?
Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Adams Stafford,
yes.
Mrs. Ahmed,
Yes.
Ms. Boozer Strother,
Yes.
Mr. Burrows,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Montero,
Yes.
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
Mrs. Queen,
Yes.
Mrs. Shepherd,
Yes.
Mr. Thomas,
Absolutely yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Yes.
13 ayes, 1 absent.
Thank you, Ms. Berkeley. Next up is my favorite part. And thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to lead this meeting. It's the first time I've ever done this. So thank you for having some grace with as we move through this. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Madam Chair, before point of order, may I put a motion to approve actions we took in executive session?
Oh, yes, yes.
Ms. King, can you provide some information on why that's not needed for this one?
I'll defer to Mr. Thomas. It was my understanding from Mr. Thomas that that item was not included in the list of items that were called for in the special meeting, thus they could not be added to the agenda, but I defer to Mr. Thomas since I'm restating his advice.
You're on mute, Mr. Thomas.
Yes. Ms. Ahmed, can you restate your motion because I was reading some paperwork when you were speaking?
Yes, Mr. Thomas, it's a procedural motion to approve the actions taken in executive session earlier today.
Okay, and I was present for most of that executive session. And Ms. King, what is your concern about approving the action taken in executive session as to motions that were made?
When you and I had discussed the agenda and I had asked you about adding this item, you said that it shouldn't be on this agenda because this was a special meeting and it was not listed in the items that Mr. Burrows referenced when he called for a special meeting. And that at a special meeting, you can only address those items that were called for during the special meeting.
Okay.
Or when it was special meeting was called for.
All right. So the item for which I was present for discussion, it was part of the notice that was posted for the special meeting. So I see no reason why the board could not take action, take a motion to approve the actions that they took during that meeting.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarity. And this is just a procedural thing, which is why we're able to do this, to confirm the actions that were taken in the executive session. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition?
Abstain.
Abstain.
And I will
Abstain.
also, there are 1, 2, 3. I think we'll just need to call the vote. Ms. Berkeley. Please
Yes.
call the vote to accept the actions taken in executive session.
Mrs. Adams Stafford,
Yes.
Mrs. Emmett,
Yes.
Ms. Boozer Strother,
Abstain.
Mr. Burrows,
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yeah.
Mr. Montero,
Abstain.
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
Mrs. Queen,
Yes.
Mrs. Shepherd,
Abstain.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
I was not present for a very big majority of the meeting, so I abstain.
Mrs. Williams.
Abstain.
And a point of clarification, does Ms. Jackson vote on the confirmation of actions in executive session?
Yes, her vote should count on that. Well, actually, she was not present for that meeting, was she?
I was.
You were? All right, but you were not allowed to vote on the item.
Item, so she was not allowed to vote.
Correct.
Right, so her vote would not count.
Thank you.
7 ayes. 3, 4, 5. 5 abstentions, 1 absent, and 1 non-voting member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berkeley. Before I call for the motion again, I would like to give Board Member Joshua Thomas an opportunity to have a period of personal privilege, a point of personal privilege.
Thank you so much, Madam Vice Chair. And I've been having my video off, just not feeling the best this evening. I wanted to just say to the public, I know at the end of our Thursday meeting, I had a small hiccup, small error on my part. It sometimes feels like it is just us board members on our own Zoom call. It can be hard to remember that there are a lot of folks watching. I asked a question about personal contact information to my colleague, Ms. Shepherd. I have apologized to her privately, but I did just want to state that was never my intention. And so I do sincerely apologize. Thank you for being understanding, Ms. Shepherd. I did just want to say for the public, because I had seen some posts on social media that thought that I did that intentionally. Again, not at all my intention. Thank you all, and thanks, Ms. Shepherd, for your understanding.
Thank you, Board Member Thomas. Now, can we have a motion? Sorry, Ms. Queen?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Anybody want to hang around and chat?
Oh,
Because I don't.
good evening.
Okay.
All of you guys, be blessed.
Everybody have a great evening. Thank you.
All in favor?
All in favor, say aye.
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 Bye.